Sorry about that, guys. Just gonna getting it mixed up in the works here. Anyways, welcome to the Ion Canon podcast, your home on the Star Wars Underworld podcast network for in-depth conversation, discussion on lore, the High Republic, and the whole canon of the galaxy far, far away. I promise I'm here. I'm Matthew. That is Joel. Joel, how are you doing this week?
Pretty good. What a week. All the Disney stuff going on. The Emperor's we got a new emperor. We have a new emperor. It's
He's
a
not that
it is
new. Hate to break it to you.
no,
I
it's
just saw that news. I don't even know what to think about it. Anyways, this week we're talking about another emperor named Palpatine and maybe Kira, Hidden Empire. Diving into a bit of that, a bit of Andor. Then, as the title suggests, and as we talked about last week, there's big words time. Authorial Custodianship of characters, including Ahsoka, among others. Okay, let's get into the early plugs, the opening plugs. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Yes, we are still on Twitter. For now, and I'm probably going to branch out as opposed to delete, but addition rather than subtraction. Twitter at Ion Canon Pod. You can follow us there, Twitter and Instagram, also on Twitch. Hello, on Twitter. That's a fun time there. And then every Thursday or Friday, let's say Friday, got my Tractor Beam comic book reviews. This week talked about Dr. Aphra number 26, Han Solo and Chewbacca number 7, and of course I did go into my thoughts on Hidden Empire number 1. And so you can catch those on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. I usually get to them kind of Friday night. Comics come out Wednesday, Friday night. Of course, also usually Monday night or Tuesday, all of our full Ion Canon episodes. They're already up on YouTube. This one is on YouTube right now as we talk, but also on the Star Wars Underworld channel, but also on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Look up Ion Canon Pod there and find us. Also, bless you there, Joel. We got YouTube memberships here on the Star Wars Underworld YouTube page. Give us super chats. You can connect with us in those ways and support the channel, support what we do here. And of course we got the Discord, Star Wars Underworld Discord. Joel and I are both involved in that, posting news, talking about Star Wars, talking about Andor. I'm talking about the World Cup. You know how it is. It's all lots of fun with the Venn diagram there. So that's the plugs out of the way. Let's dive into our week in Star Wars. Joel, you have a theory.
I
Tell us
have
your
a
theory.
theory.
Oh
I
gosh,
have a theory in my brain. Woo, woo,
it's like your Weird Al Yankovic parody on the
I have a.
Underworld's. There we go.
I love Weird Al. Yes. So I have been thinking, and I've always had this thought in my brain that expanded universe fans were the most mentally prepared out of all the subsections of fandom for the Disney era of Star Wars. I should put a note the sane ones who don't get all
Those,
super
yeah.
but the reason why, because quite frankly, if you really think about it, if you really think about it, how is the Disney era any real different from what the expanded universe was, right? You got a post-Endor era that has nothing to do with George Lucas. You got a bunch of books and comics and stuff that's not part of the main Skywalker saga. You have different types of stories that normally aren't in the mold of the Lucas saga stuff. And the only real difference is that there are now movie to TV shows. Oh, and Palpatine came back from the dead, so there's that too. You're on mute, Matthew, so you know. But sort of like I feel like EU fans made this transition because this is just what we've been through for the last many years. Retcons and little stuff like that, but ongoing stories and video game storylines and deepening the lore and whatnot. Thrawn, Palpatine coming back as a clone. We've been through it.
Yeah.
What's this been different for us for the last 30 years? Just the stories are different, but it's sort of like we just been used to what Star Wars can be like outside of Lucas's purview. Even though technically he was still the owner at the time, but he didn't have anything really to do with those books. So
he still hasn't seen the Christmas special,
but that's sort of my theory. It's like I feel like EU fans, maybe out of everyone else who kind of never experienced Star Wars, were the most mentally prepared. And as Qui-Gon said, if I remember this, your focus determines your reality. And our reality is we know what Star Wars can be like without George Lucas's direct involvement for years. So
Mhm.
some of you are just catching up to us.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my pet theory here.
It's definitely an interesting thought, and I'll admit it took me a second to get what you meant because I thought you were going to talk about Jason Solo and Ben Solo, for example.
Well, I mean,
Or
there's definitely that too. You got a
there's those
Solo falling
story
to the dark
parallels there,
side.
but was it Darth Cadus? Is his name?
Yeah.
Kylo Ren. Sorry, I'm going to sneeze.
Bless you.
All right, I'm good. We're good. We're good. I'm still here. I'm still here. Here we go. On Canon podcast. Anyway, yeah, but to have the flexibility, and we're going to get into that a little bit at the end. We've gone into that. What it's been 10 and a half months going 10 months going on this podcast, learning flexibility in terms of story. Yeah, I can see what you're saying there. Maybe I mean I know it depends on like you mentioned which EU fans, because I know some EU fans are well, there's the most extreme EU fans are all no anything that isn't by George Lucas or isn't in the Disney era is not
It's a
Star
weird.
Wars at all.
Yeah.
Then there's some EU fans are this is my EU, and it's this very rigid understanding of canon as it pertains to the EU before the Disney cutoff. But yeah, I mean, those who've weathered the storm. I think I go back to when we had Kyle Katarn on and how he talked about ideas of the prequel trilogy and how that all got thrown out of the water when in 1999, people have maybe ideas of the sequel trilogy that get what it's supposed to be that had a lot of ebb and flow. So I do see what you're saying. Lessons to be learned about flexibility and whatnot. I don't know if you have anything to respond to that. But there we go. Okay, I'll get to mine. I have two kind of small, fun ones, nothing too serious, but both about Phase 2 of the High Republic. Quest for the Hidden City. I'm still working on that. I'm going to think about when I end up finishing it, how we might talk about that here.
Right. I couldn't
Pardon?
find the Audible. Getting an
Yeah, it's
Audible,
not.
right?
It hasn't come out yet. I don't know what the issue, the deal with there is, but I think it's coming out soon,
Okay.
from what I
I'm
heard.
gonna wait for the Audible.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm about 9 or 10 chapters in. It's by George Mann. Again, quite enjoying it. I think I've finally hit the point of where it is, the point of what the story is. For those who know, when they encounter this other species with wings, it's fun. I won't tell anymore. But I've thankfully hit that. Oh, I can't wait to go read some more stage, which you always want, right? Hopefully, maybe even after I record tonight, I might go read some more of this book. That again, High Republic, young reader. The pictures actually helped. I'll say this: the pictures were very helpful. I don't feel written down to at all. It was pretty great. Last thing, just kind of a newsy thing. I'll just interject in here. It's kind of my part of my this week. I don't know how many 3-4 hours ago, Gizmodo launched an article that has another expert of convergence by Zara Cordova, and the book comes out tomorrow, so I'm not really going to bother with spoiling myself with an excerpt. I don't know when I'll be able to get to reading because I'm still reading Quest for the Hidden City because I just bought it recently, but hopefully be able to yoink that book from the bookstore soon. Anyway, I have it on pre-order convergence. Anyways, the interesting point though is the subheading or the deck, as we say in the industry. So under the headline, there's another subheading on the article, and it says, "Meet the Path of the Open Hand, a mysterious new group in the second phase of Star Wars: The High Republic," which is weird since I've already met the Path of the Open Hand in Path of Deceit. And then I had to step back and say, well, there are people who haven't read Path of Deceit, who maybe don't want to read a young adult novel, which is too bad. You're missing out. But Joel, criticism you've had, the criticism a lot of people had is Phase 1, you had to read everything in order to actually get caught up. And it seems to me, and I mentioned this in the Discord this afternoon, it seems to me they're taking that criticism to heart for Phase 2 and are going to take the time to get people caught up. Zerada Cordova is going to take the time to get people caught up with maybe some of the things they missed in Path of Deceit about the mother and about everything going on Dalna and that. And and the challenge, of course, is going to be in a way that doesn't bore the people who've read Path of Deceit. But Joel, I'll throw this one to you. What do you think of? I mean, it's just a headline, but what do you think of it? Do you think there's something to this possibility that they're
I
going to
mean,
take the criticism?
I think what matters is not necessarily retreading your steps, although that can happen, and more just seeing it from a different perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Like you saw Path of Deceit, we saw the Path of the Open Hand through what was
Marta,
his name? What not
or yeah, shoot, the
what was
Jedi
the
kid,
Gimbo, Bembo,
Kevmo,
Kevmo.
Kevmo,
There was
weird name,
there
Kevmo.
was there was an O somewhere.
Yeah,
Kevmo and Martha,
Marta,
I,
Marva,
Marta,
and or Marta Rowe.
Marta. Kind of their little cute little like young relationship, and
Yeah.
very personable. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
this will take a different angle to it. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like how many times we kind of have to get reintroduced to the Empire every time we go to original trilogy stuff.
Mm-hmm.
As long as we can keep getting it from different angles.
That's true.
Um, so it's like maybe this will be a different angle of the Path of the Open Hand from whatever the main character of the
Mm-hmm.
adult novel will be. Um, so that'll be interesting. Is it this getting an audible tomorrow? I hope.
I do know when I was just now googling up here, the excerpt, there's also an audio excerpt
Oh,
you
good.
can listen to. So I imagine so. They seem to be more on the ball with the adult novels, especially. So
And because this is an adult novel, the
yeah.
adult novels I tend to notice just in general
Hmm.
do a little bit more of like the deep lore world building than the young adult stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like in times, and other times like the young adult stuff is like it cuts the meat and just gets to the crux of like, oh, here's two
Yeah.
characters in love or something like that. A little bit
Yeah.
more personable. It's always good when you can find good balance, and to me the best adult novels like find the balance between like good character stuff and but they get into a little deeper, like paragraphs like here's the world building situation, like this is what the Republic's like at the time.
Hmm.
So maybe we'll get it from a different kind of scale as well. Because isn't the main character like a bit more important in the hierarchy of like galactic
Yeah. Possibly.
events?
I
So
mean,
that's kind of
maybe. I mean, Marta Rowe, I'd say she's pretty darn important,
that's
but
true. So that's true.
and she is the main character of Path of Deceit.
That's
Don't
true.
get me wrong.
So maybe we'll get like from a more geopolitical
Yeah.
spectrum of this book.
Hmm.
I don't know what it's about, but I'll take a look see when I read it. But yeah, I think different angles to similar concepts are always appreciative. So I think that's how you do it without getting boring.
Yeah, I mean the adult novels, as a rule, are way more complicated. Often,
Mhm.
uh, a lot more going on. Tend to be a lot more tragic. Trying to think, even like the Aftermath trilogy, like Life Debt, compared to and that is the difference. You do feel the difference. I mean, the Rising Storm versus some of the young adult novels in phase one, which I love the young adult novels more. I'll say that. Um, but yeah, so this my point being that this adds the possibility of more complexity on the part of what the path is about. Another thing to say is Marta. I mean, this is the thing that High Republic especially has done so well, is being aware of what the main character at their age is going to be able to grasp or care about. And Marta, by definition, I mean that her arc in that novel goes from incredibly, simple in the best way to more complicated, more, I mean, probably simple in not the best way, I should also say. But there's this layer of betrayal and hurt that is introduced. Whereas I think with these adult characters, they're already experienced that because they're older. So that's, I mean, compared to Quest for the Hidden City, where it's a younger Padawan is the main character in that one,
Right.
and he's going through, or she's going through it. I don't know why I keep quoted. Gender is kind of complicated with Rupert, but yeah, I mean, she's going to go through this layers of political complexity for that too. But yeah, I think right off the bat, with Convergence, it's already going to be there. So yeah, it's interesting. I'm excited. I still think phase two is going to be better than phase one, which is saying something for me. But yeah, you never know. So it's good to see they take the criticism to heart. Okay, let's move on. We got Andor episode 11, second last episode of the season, which is saying
Mm.
something. I will say one thing before I ask you your thoughts, Joel. Is um, remember when the series started? It was like three or
No.
4 months ago. Like we're in an era of what 5, 6 episodes, and now we're at episode 11. Remember those flashbacks to the Clone Wars way back when?
I
Before
know.
the
It's
Clone Wars?
like,
It was before the Clone Wars, and then flashbacks to the Clone Wars way back when. Yeah, episode 11. This has been a journey. It's been a show. What did you think of episode 11?
oh dang, scenes are heating up. I got a little misty eye with Marva's death. I mean, be too emo, man. That droid, so much heart. Like
Mm-hmm.
dang, I fell for him. Like the dog, like just without his owner now. Like it was just so bad. Everything, everything just kind of coming together. Little creepy Lita getting into traditional Chandrillan customs.
Yeah.
Probably despite her mom in some way, but also
Mm-hmm.
I found it interesting that Mon says, Chandrillan customs tend to be more prevalent in Coruscant
Mm-hmm.
than maybe Chandrilla proper, which I think makes sense.
Yeah.
Historically, fascist capitals tend to want to be these
Mm-hmm.
utopias of the traditional repressive kind of cultural traditions. And Palpatine in some of the comics it says Coruscant is very his world out
Yeah.
of all of them, so he probably takes personal interest in making sure it's molded in his very image compared to maybe like Alderaan and Chandrilla, which he kind of probably leaves alone for the most part, but always with the threat of "I will destroy you if I have to, but I'm not going to, but I can't,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm not going to, but I
Yeah.
can't."
Until he does.
So
Yeah.
until he does. Um,
Yeah.
it was cool seeing Cyril's buddy again, like the crazy commander,
Oh yeah, that
commander
guy.
sergeant. I love that guy. He's like
Yeah.
takes his job so seriously, man.
It's a smelter. It's a smelter. Sorry.
Cyril's gonna go to Q Ferrex and probably screw something up for everybody.
Yeah.
And everything just kind of it's and also maybe seeing more of the origins of Saw's paranoia, which are valid given that Lucen probably does have people everywhere and Lucen's kind of, or maybe he doesn't, but he's so good at pretending. It's like Lucen just
Yeah.
knows how to play the game.
It's tubes.
I know it's tubes.
That's good.
See, that's the whole thing. Okay, I'm just gonna say this is the one thing I love about Star Wars and like think the show right now. Like Andor has been like so like the most serious, realistic Star Wars, and then Lucen just goes tubes. Just tubes. That's just such a funny name.
Yeah.
Like, oh, it's tubes. Like it's just so serious. Like not tubes, not your boy tubes.
I mean, we know it isn't, but yeah.
And Andor and Melchi's final moments together. I love how Melchi's like, he goes from we're not getting out to like we need to tell everyone. We need to like tell the people, rise up the prisoners. And then Andor looking at the sunset.
Right.
Which is, I think we haven't talked about this, and I don't think it gets talked enough. The sunset being such a prevalent, iconic thing, given the final moments of Andor's life in Rogue One, just him and Jin on the beach and the sunset, and they hug.
And then Luke looking at the classic Luke looking at the Tatooine sunsets, and
that too is but it's like like Luke. It's interesting because like Luke is like I'll see a sunrise I'm never going to see, but in some ways. Andrew got to see the sunrise. He didn't get to live long, but he got to see the sunrise at which, Lucen gave up his soul to fight for.
Mm-hmm.
So I found that was interesting. But overall, a really, really fun episode. And I just can't wait for the finale. I don't want it to be over. I'm having so much fun.
Yeah. Well, good news, Joel. You can just go to Disney Plus and watch it again.
I know.
Yeah, no, it won't be new anymore. Well, yeah, and Ferrex is such a dark, overcast planet. At least that's my impression. Just very grungy, industrial. Yeah, interesting. You mentioned Mon's family and all that. I hadn't thought that it was because it's Palpatine fascism. I mean, that's possible. Certainly a possibility. I'd say it's more. I mean, two things. Yeah, it's definitely her teenage rebellion, and we do see that. We see especially nowadays, when going through, here's some theology time. Can I get the bring up? Can I get the thing up? Can I get the thing up? There it is. There it is. There it is.
Yay.
So the baby boom generation and went through a period of, I mean, and the rise of secularism and I'd say more liberal theologies, if I can use that term, more open beliefs, being Christian, but more embracing pluralism, embracing you do you, be happy, do what's good for you, kind of thing, and there's something to that for sure. But when you're raised that way, and you're a teenager, the form of teenage rebellion you see is often kids turning to very traditional religious communities because they offer, in part because they offer a sense of community. We see that around that table with her friends, right? That connection that she has, and the uniform and the ritual and everything. But it's definitely a form of teenage rebellion to say, oh, my mom, the highfalutin senator, I'm gonna join my people's ancient ancestral cult, if you will. And so yeah, I get that a little bit, but also I think it's because of the diaspora community. That also tends to be where well, it not tends to be, it is where the community needs to negotiate, consciously how much they're going to hold on to their traditions versus embrace the wider society. And that is often the tension that that generations face. I mean, it's usually the other way around, right? A lot of first generation immigrants tend to uphold what they know and live the way they know, whereas younger folks, the next generation, wants to have friends and be on social media and chill and whatever it is that's
I've always
part of
heard
wider
the
society.
opposite.
So yeah,
Where
I mean, it can be the opposite, right? You can retrench and say, no, I want to actually explore my culture, my heritage, and yeah, possibly to the exclusion of of embracing the wider society. And language is a big part of that too. So that's sorry, go to what were you going to say about that?
well, yeah, because like when I've heard like a lot of first generation immigrants are like, no, we got to be
True.
white.
Yeah, you can
Like
assimilation. Yeah.
Assimilate ourselves, and then it's the generation afterwards. This is less religious and more cultural, where it's like,
Yeah.
I mean, religion sometimes plays a part, but it's like for societies like the first generation come to America, like, no, we gotta change our name. We're now
True.
Bob Smith instead of Jose Hernandez or something.
Yeah.
Don't learn Spanish, learn English. That's what
Mhm.
my mom told me. Like her family, no, you learn English.
Mm.
We're gonna and then like later generations, like, no, we're also, we come from this place. Why whiten ourselves up?
Right. Yeah,
So
assimilation. Yeah, is
assimilation.
a
I guess
pressure. Yeah.
what I took out of it from that scene though
Mhm.
is mom's like looking at her with Vel. She likes Vel, like Leah likes Vel. She might for some reason. So
Mhm.
I do think there is some of that rebellious teenager stuff going on.
Mhm.
I do think there's also Bond Step specifically says it's more prevalent on Coruscant than it is on Chandrilla.
Yeah. So the
Um,
diaspora community is what I'm getting at there.
but I think it's interesting. It's the traditional stuff that's also on Chandrilla because
Yeah.
I do think, if this is the culture that says let's marry our kids off at 16 and get
Mhm.
rid of them sooner, there's sort of a repressive thing to that tradition that seems to be allowed. And I
Mhm.
think, Palpatine would foster the more repressive parts of culture in his
That's interesting.
capital because, it's the fascist capital and it's fascist. And then,
Yeah.
it's kind of hard because like the Empire is such a heterogeneous society just by the nature of the galaxy. It's not like
Mhm.
German traditions. It's like, it's like Palpatine can't just enforce sisism on everybody. I think
He wouldn't
because I
want
don't
to. He doesn't want anybody to know, right?
exactly. So
Yeah.
so it's like there's no state religion in the Empire.
Yeah.
I mean, some legend stuff there was, but it doesn't seem like in
Well, no,
canon.
there is a
So
state religion. It's called the Empire.
exactly, but it's sort of
So
like it.
the point I'll say is it's a bit more like Rome, right? Where they
Yeah.
allowed local customs as a way of appeasing people to say, "Oh yeah, and look how benevolent and great we are. Um, give us all your taxes and your land and your armies and your soldiers and ultimately your allegiance, and then we'll put a temple to Caesar there and all that. But
But
yeah, sorry.
my final point was like, because these traditions can also serve as some sort of societal control.
Yeah.
Palpatine, in particular, probably wants to foster all the various societal controls of the various cultures
Mhm.
together, and kind of like then maybe he'll have more control over the leaders of those cultures and traditions, and then
Mhm.
that just secures his own power, at least on Coruscant, which is his planet
Yeah.
directly.
It's an interesting thought. I hadn't considered that aspect of it, but yeah, maybe. I mean, especially given it's Mothma versus Palpatine. I mean, that's the knocking out, drag him out fight that goes until the Battle of Jakku, basically. So
And
yeah,
sorry, I keep thinking you think, but just one more thing, and I'll
yeah,
finish.
okay,
I found it interesting. Like even Perrin is like probably does not like these traditions that much as well,
mhm,
and probably like you see that Perrin's a lot more open minded, so
yeah.
they're both worried probably.
And I mean, part of this under the surface there is, uh, are they going to marry her off to this mob boss in order to get the loan?
My boss son.
Yeah, or the mob boss, whatever, the family, um, to get the loan, and they can give into that, consign her daughter to this life just so she can. I mean, it's related to what Luthien was saying, in the previous episode about, um, having to give up his soul for the sake of everyone else's freedom. Is there's some parallel there? So
Mhm.
hopefully she doesn't give in, but again, we know that she's not out of the way. I keep bringing this up. uh Mon Mothma's family is got to be somehow out of the picture, or she leaves them behind to go to this meeting and join the Rebel Alliance and take over, and have that declare her Senate seat, resign her Senate seat, and the thing we saw in Rebels, which that's I mean, that's on screen. That is canon, screen canon, if I can use that term. So yeah, I had two thoughts about it there. I mean, I kind of want to maybe give more time to it, but that's okay. Maybe we can give more time to it in another episode, but I'll go through it quickly. I was thinking about, the symbolism of Luthen's shop. So this is when, Vel actually goes to visit Clea. I was thinking, that thought came to me, is that there's all this geeky lore around the shop, and then also when, they're using the when Luthen and Clea are having that conversation, using coded language, using spy language, talking about the artifacts or whatnot, when they're really talking about, Andor and Saw and whoever else.
Mhm.
Um, so I was thinking about this, and that, I mean, it's a pretty apt metaphor for the conversation we had a number of weeks ago, when we were way back when talking about fan service. And in this shop is all this geeky lore, all these artifacts that we point to and be like, yeah, there's that. And he got Pablo Hidalgo and Tony Gilroy got Pablo Hidalgo to say, what works here, what works there, whatever. And we all geek out and love it, but that's just a cover for what Luthen and Clea are really doing, which is just reality grounded spy show, um, and rebellion, sedition show. And so, it's this metaphor for what Andor is doing in the Star Wars universe. It's kind of using the language and the environment of this fantasy franchise to tell something that's very different. And here's the thing: is probably a lot of the criticism, that and the Last Jedi, is we don't like it when shows point this out to us and needle us
Mhm.
with it. um and we enjoy it. I always say that Star Wars at its best works when those two things work together: the geeky lore and the real human grounded story inform each other and play off each other. And that, to me, is really why I'm here for the Senators and Space Wizards. But uh this is a different kind of show, and it's a challenging show, but it's one I'm finding very satisfied with. um and just at least the question, say, okay, there's a limit to how much this geeky lore can actually tell a meaningful story. It can, but it's limited. And one that we can relate to. I guess I don't know any actual real life spies or rebels, but we to teach us about the real world and how things really are in our world. So that was just this fascinating symbol that they've chosen throughout this series. And but of course, we do see in this episode Luthen do the most Star Warsy thing ever: a dogfight in space with lasers. So against this weird ship that has a tractor beam. So it's still there. It's still doing that. It hasn't lost the language. It's just using that language in a way that we're not quite familiar with, or if we are with the Last Jedi, we remember being challenged by. So, yeah, again, I think the Last Jedi, I think Ryan Johnson did a lot of that, the same kind of thing, bit more fusing the lore with what the Force is, for example, and whatnot, but also what we think of as heroes and heroism. And we're going to get to Luke and the Last Jedi in a bit, but in our main topic. But that was my one thought. My second thought is thinking of Adria Arjona and her the characters she often often takes on a lot of roles, and or the first episode of Good Omens. She just, as part of her craft, as part of her trade, she works well in roles that embrace her sexuality and her, you know, the desire to hook up and connect or whatever, you know. And again, in both Andor and Good Omens, the first episodes there, she does in this show. This is different and an interesting thing that's happened, you know, when she's being tortured. And well, she encounters the imperial occupation, the rebellion, and now she's being tortured, and you know, she's completely not sexualized in this scene, in this
Oh,
episode by this
Bix.
point.
Okay.
And it happens at the hands of Deidre Muro, not literally at her hands. She's not, but she's the one overseeing. She's the one doing it effectively. Deidre Muro, who, as we saw previously, when Cyril comes and hits on her, she has nothing of it, and we've kind of talked about what two different things, two different reasons what that might be about, but primarily, yeah, she just wants to do her job and be respected for doing her job. But yeah, the you know the contrast is there, and it's yeah, it's just a fascinating exploration of Adria Arjona's career, of being put in a different kind of role. So that's just a thought I had about that. I don't know if you have anything to add there, Joel, but
Oh, actually, I do, and I'm glad you
yeah.
reminded me.
Mm-hmm.
What I really like about that Bix torture stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's so terrible saying that. But I
Mixed
really like
torture.
that someone getting tortured.
Yeah.
Just the weight that the show gives to things that Star Wars doesn't really give weight to.
Mm-hmm.
Like in A New Hope, Princess Leia gets tortured by the droid. And then, for the most part, she's kind of okay. Like
Mm-hmm.
she bounces back. You know, when we see her in the cell with Luke, you know, like a little sword for a stormtrooper. You know, with Bix, you see her
Yeah.
and she's just haggard. Mentally, she's just not there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like she just cries when she asks, you know, whether Enter Krieger was loosened. And I mean, you know, and I'm sure there's an in-universe thing you could say, like, "Oh, Leia wasn't tortured that bad compared to Bix." Yada yada. But it's like, forget the in-universe discussion. It's just like,
Yeah.
here's an example of a character getting tortured in New Hope. They get bounced back really easily. Even their planet gets destroyed, and yet that's not really dealt with afterwards.
Yeah.
And you know, I got a whole thing about like how people complain about the Hosnian Prime thing, and I do agree with that. I don't think Alderaan's any better. It's maybe a little better, but not by much.
Good thought. Yeah.
And then with Bix, it's like, no, she got tortured. She is what a tortured person in prison for probably days would
Mm-hmm.
feel like, and it's just the weight and feel is all there. So,
Yeah.
it's an example of kind of how the show does something that kind of adds that meaty weight that sometimes Star Wars doesn't always do, doesn't have to, but I like that this time they decide, you know what, we're going to show it. We're going to show, yes, what getting tortured by fascist regimes is like.
Yeah, I mean, and I'll admit I haven't seen much of Good Omens, but I saw a few episodes, and you know, I get the contrast even with what's the name of her character in that show, and not just the sexualized part, but just everything. The contrast with how Bix is at the beginning of this show You can see it underscores just how much torture, that experience of torture, uh, tries to remove someone's identity and
Right.
collapse and defeat someone's identity, kill them without actually killing them, so you can provide they can still provide information. Yeah, really effective and really going into it. I mean, psychological torture there too. I mean, again, this show it's showing us things about the real world that we didn't expect. So excited, well, not excited, but very intriguing. Like you're right, it's a special show. We're long past saying whether or not the episode was good. Clearly, it was great. The acting in this is it's got to be the best executed show.
Oh
It
yeah,
is the
probably.
best executed show live action in that Star Wars has done so far. I mean, that's not
Doesn't have to be your
really up for.
favorite, but you gotta say, yeah, it's well executed.
Yeah, I don't think you can debate that. I just Mandalorian's good. Mandalorian's great. Book of Boba Fett has Kenobi. I love Kenobi, but man, just the craft of this show is
Oh yeah.
all around next level. So okay, a few more things here. For very quickly, I'm gonna
Quickly.
extend the tractor because Joel, you wanted to talk about this. Before you do, let's check out. Just gotta check out. Speaking of Sheev, um, I just wanted to
Nice.
show this because I haven't posted it on Instagram yet. Um, this is the David Lopez travel variant. I don't know what a travel variant is, but I'll look that up. And but I love that. Speaking of Coruscant being Palpatine's planet,
Mhm.
here it is. You can probably see the glare of my screen there. Sorry about that. But yeah, I mean, I just love the style, the deco style, everything. So this wasn't too bad, too expensive, but it was more expensive than most variants go. It's one in 25, so I think they had to order 25. I don't quite know what that ratio means either, but I do know something about comics, some things I know. Anyways, Hidden Empire #1. Hidden Empire is finally here, of course, by Charles Soule, art by Stephen Cummings, and the direct edition cover I think is Paulo Sequeira. Yeah, and again, Chico and Tractor Beam, I talked about it, but Joel, you would like an opportunity to go into this issue #1. What stood out to you?
Are we allowed to give spoilers?
Yes, spoil away. Came out well,
Spoilers.
came out on Wednesday.
Um, Almost everything, man. But I think the thing that excites me the most is Kira's plan to use a Sith ghost to destroy Palpatine. I'm excited about to find out who the ghost is. Are they new? Are they someone we know? Are they someone that was created but just hasn't been expanded upon? I guess that means someone we know. I guess someone we know from Legends or someone we know in
Yeah.
just they've introduced the Sith Lord before. Um, and it's sounding a lot like Kira didn't take over Crimson Dawn so much as he's just continuing what Maul did, and Maul kind of just got lost because of his own
Hmm.
things. Because it sounds like they were just doing the same thing, and I guess Maul on Malachor pretty much was Maul's plan to destroy Palpatine. I guess that's the vibe I got. By the
Hmm.
way, interesting connections to Inferno Squadron. They made a cameo.
Hmm. Yeah,
Um,
sure they did. Yeah,
Somebody oh, and, Prince Shizor might have also made a cameo. That
he
was
gets a
cool.
mention. Yeah, for the
Um,
second time. Yeah.
but,
Mhm.
no, overall, really exciting, really big event story.
Mhm.
And I'm looking forward to see where this all goes. Good opening start.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely feels significant. Um I for some reason, I don't know why, I completely missed the whole Sith Ghost thing because I was so focused on the Archivist and Kofan Ferris. And I read this and then I read Dr. Aphra later. So you see more about Kofan Ferris's uh circumstances there. But yeah, the fact that you're gonna get a Sith expert and an Ascendant expert working together, and the Ascendant, of course, we're trying to parody the Sith by using magnets. I mean, I'm not kidding, using technology, but it goes more into that. And you read the Doctor Aphra comic, they get um, a lot going on. But it shows Kira's working every single angle here, which way but she's also using the dark side to try and defeat the dark side, which yeah, it does. Star Wars, it's not what George Lucas set up. I mean, in the game mechanics of the universe, if you will, and there's a reason that doesn't work. Like darkness can't squelch darkness. It just doesn't can't shine anything and dissipate the darkness. So we'll see how that goes. And lots to do with Savawatch Go University of Barlett. So check out the tractor beam. Joel, if you have any more thoughts before we move on.
No, sorry.
That's okay.
I like
Like,
that. Just one more thing. I like the fact that since we kind of know what has to happen, because clearly Kira's not going to kill Palpatine unless there's a twist. But
somehow
I
returned
one
again. I'm just kidding.
I know I like the fact this is being told as a story
Mhm.
to two people who I'm going to put a guess right now. I think it's Luke and Leia. I think they're the ones listening to the story. Um,
Hmm.
I would be very interested though if we're using Sith ghosts and spirits, if they're gonna do like something where this explain why Palpatine says that he's all the Sith in Episode 9. Per se, I
Hmm.
don't need an explanation. They're just like, oh, it's just Palpatine being his egotistical self.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Weirder things have happened in the comics, so those are my last two thoughts. I'm excited. I love Hidden
Yeah.
Empire.
If it that would fit something connected to, I mean, I thought they were sequel trilogy characters or something. But we don't know, and we may never know. Well, we should know eventually. They get a bit more dialogue in this. Yeah, I mean, and that fits with Charles Soule. He's on a mission to connect some dots with the sequel trilogy a little more, and yeah, and I mean, you could say, okay, leave that up to be a mystery or not. Uh, I'm here for whatever he has to lay down in terms of that. So, because he's definitely thought about those dots that need connecting in the Rise of Skywalker specifically. Of course, Adam Christopher did a great job connecting a lot of things, but yeah, here's Charles Soule doing what he does best. So that's Hidden Empire. It'd be sad to see again. You talk about Andor being done, season 1 being done. It's sad to see this era of comic storytelling being done. It is significant. It is
Yeah.
to me, to my mind, it is like High Republic level. What they've been able to put together, and it is similar to the committee authorship by committee with Alyssa Wong and Greg Pak and even Mark Guggenheim a little bit, but and then the author of Bounty Hunters. Why am I blanking on his name? I know. Listen to the tractor beam. Well, you'll check it out there. But anyway, yeah, it'll be sad to see this end, but I'm curious as to what's next. How do you top this? Or maybe they don't try for a bit. I don't know.
I hope not.
Anyway, so yeah, that is Hidden Empire. So Joel, I have a question for you.
Okay.
We
Question. Huh?
threw out some words at the top here.
Right. We did.
Big words, big words. What do you mean by authorial, and what do you mean by custodianship?
Okay, well, first, authorial, author, the author. What is the author? In Star Wars case, the author is kind of a bit more nebulous than a book author, although we do have book authors. Saying author a lot, weird. We got showrunners, the director,
Auteur. Sorry.
writer, auteur. We got the director, writer.
Yeah.
Kind of a situation. Because Star Wars is a really weird franchise in terms of just its kind of creative stewardship. I'm going to assume we use a lot of big words today, aren't we?
Yeah.
We're getting our academics on. Where it's George Lucas's baby. It's his little weird story. Started with A New Hope back in '77, Star Wars in '77. That he expanded upon with Empire during the Jedi. Definitely brought in some people, but he definitely oversaw and kind of shepherded a lot of the direction of that trilogy. And he was very much, I own it. We own this thing. We own the Star. I own the Star War, not the Fox people, not the Disney. I, George Lucas, am the master. Me. I don't know.
Getting a bit of a
Like,
Kermit voice.
I don't know. It merges into a Kermit sometimes. And then he's
Anyway.
like, and then in the '90s, he's like, I don't want to make Star Wars anymore. My life kind of sad. Or here, book authors, I'll let you take over the universe. I'm done. Maybe I'll do prequels later, but I don't know.
Tim's on doing this thing.
Yeah. But
Well, what does custodianship then mean?
Kind of the people who authorial custodianship, but kind of the people who like oversee the overall story.
Mhm.
Like, obviously, because Star Wars now and Star Wars kind of always has been weirdly in terms of like the universe, the in-universe story,
Mhm.
not just George Lucas's singular vision. It has been other people adding in lore, story beats,
Yeah.
background information, meta story, from Tim Zahn to Stackpool to later Filoni and then Gilroy and Favreau and JJ and Ryan. All these people coming
Yeah.
together to build this singular universe. And in some cases, a singular story, depending on how much you want to view Star Wars as a singular story, or a
Mhm.
bunch of stories that kind of all build upon each other. And that gets into the whole canon debate. So that's kind of what I mean by look at like just the authorial custodianship, like who's working with these characters, who's working with the stories and direction, overall direction these characters are going on, and kind of what are the responsibility? What's the responsibility of that?
Mhm.
Is are certain authors more? Are all authors of Star Wars, and we're going to include the show running teams like Gilroy's
Mhm.
team? Like, are they all equal, or are some more prevalent than others? We've talked about this a lot with Filoni and Ahsoka, and we'll get into that later. So that is my just basic
Mhm.
idea of authorial custodianship at the time. Matthew, I'll let you add what your kind of general thoughts are before we continue to the next.
Yeah, I mean, I think to my mind, it gets at the specific question of are there well, it comes out in in this instance of are there characters where uh if you're going to use this character, if you're going to tell this story, you have to run it by this person first, or more importantly, if you're going to tell the story, uh if this story is going to be told of this character, this is the person who has to tell it. This is the right person to tell it. Again, we mentioned the clearest example is now is Ahsoka with Dave Filoni. I mean, that's and that it came out with what happened with E.K. Johnston's Ahsoka novel and how uh, E.K. Johnson, she's great. She's not the custodian of Ahsoka. Um, and so yeah, and so my sense then is who and we'll get to this in a little bit, but there's also a question of Lucasfilm's go-to person. Then, just in paper, if you want to, here's a great example. Then, if you want to have someone write a story about Sabe, uh, just after, just shooting this out here, Sabe just after Order 66 and the Rise of the Empire, and her early role in the rebellion.
Mhm.
There's only one person who should be writing that story. She's done the work. E.K. Johnson has done the work
Mhm.
of laying that down in the Padme, in the Queen's Shadow Padme trilogy that is also a Sabe trilogy.
Mhm.
Um, but also, I mean, even everything that Greg Pak has done with the characters reinforce that. So that to me is what it means specifically. But yeah, I mean, I do
It's
like that you broaden it out and say there's a responsibility to uh, to shepherd this character to I mean and I'll jump ahead a little bit here, but responsibility to continue telling the events of a character's life, but more importantly is to be consistent with the character's development.
Yeah, I agree.
And you know what I mean in terms of,
Mhm.
well, I guess the way you put it here is are they going to be fully developed and not actually change? And then that I think that's a very facile, almost comic book. The comic books at their kind of goofiest are this is what Captain America is and what he does, and he will always be this. And so if we're gonna bring him into an Avengers comic or whatever, or
No,
a
I think
Captain
it's
Marvel,
a great example because I think
yeah,
Star Wars sort of borderlines.
mm,
I think people want to think Star Wars is like the Tolkienist kind of George developed all this stuff, and it's
mhm.
not. It is more like the comic book things of like George set up the
Well,
basics, but other people have built upon it.
what I mean there is, uh, it isn't simply that. And again, we'll get to lots of examples in a minute, but it isn't simply that. Okay, we're gonna bring in this character. Doesn't matter how old they are or what the context is. They're always gonna just be that character, or we're gonna show this character and give them experiences that change their character, and so that someone who else wants to come along and tell a story later has to be consistent with what happened in the past. I mean, I think another example there is Jon Favreau wanting to tell a story about Ahsoka, or being involved in telling a story about Ahsoka, has to be aware. I mean, he is of her experiences in the Clone Wars and in the Rebellion, and then continue that story forward. So, Deborah Chow, talking about Obi-Wan and Anakin. I mean, that's the most obvious one. Deborah Chow had a solemn responsibility to shepherd this character through this transition in light of what George Lucas laid down. And she succeeded, I'd say. But the transition from looking to Anakin to looking to Luke. But that to me is what custodianship really gets at.
Yeah. So what's interesting, I'll go back to the Sabe situation. I think that's a unique case of taking a character who wasn't a character. I mean, what was describe Sabe before you know any of the books? The decoy.
Yeah.
That's it. And making her a character. And I do think E.K. Johnson made in those books Sabe a character. She created the character of Sabe more than even Lucas did. In a sense, it's like, and which has happened. And then in comic books where you'd have like a template for a character, like Daredevil was the man without fear. He was blind. I think the blindness was originally part of the character. And then Frank Miller comes along and he completely creates modern day Daredevil with like, the psychology and the Catholic guilt and all that stuff. I don't know much about Daredevil outside of the show, but like the stuff that the first season pulls from a lot of Frank Miller, and people have just been building upon that ever since. So I think it's sort of interesting when you have, because this is sort of the interesting thing, and I think this is sort of the kind of the one of the things I like to get at is the responsibility, but also letting other authors kind of take the reins of a character, especially characters that are fleshed out. Like I would say Luke, Han, and Leia were probably, and Kenobi are probably all more fleshed out than Sabe obviously was. But or like you're kind of an odd example. Rogue One, I think, created modern day Saw Gerrera that even the Clone Wars, like Saw appeared. I mean, I know Lucas had his ideas for Saw, sure, but we only saw his only arc in the Clone Wars. It's like, I remember back in the day, it's like, oh, cool, Clone Wars character. That's kind of interesting. But like, I didn't remember much about Saw Gerrera outside of like, oh, he was in that arc and he didn't like, and he and Steela got in fight and stuff. But Rogue One kind of invented the character. The writers, Gary Whitta, Tony Gilroy, Edwards directing, Forrest Whitaker, they all kind of made this character. They reinvented this character. And we've been kind of building off from that particular version backwards since, like the Forrest Whitaker version of Saw Gerrera is what they have stuck with. And we have seen the progression of monarchist to anarchist in a day and throughout the lifetimes, throughout these various things. And I think that's like a great example of maybe not a single author having custodian. Like there's no single author of Saw Gerrera the same way there is like for Ahsoka or even Sabe. But there's definitely been a very good sort of, they've looked at Rogue One. Oh, bless you. The Force be with you. They've looked at Rogue One and they've backwards, Law and Order, Rebels, kind of managed to link this character and make him one consistent thing. The growth, and it's been really appreciative about that.
I mean, the one thing I'll say about Saw, though, and I agree with what you're saying here, that we get this end point where even you can look at Jin and think, have you come here to kill me? You hear Forrest Whitaker talk about him, and he does mention Steela, and he does mention the effect of Steela's death on his character. Kind of the feeling, even Anakin and Obi-Wan have come in to help, and now that they couldn't prevent her death. I mean, in a way, kind of, well, not caused it, but it was from the Separatists, which, interestingly enough, I wonder if that's going to come play into it a little bit of he doesn't trust Separatists because they killed his sister. But Yeah, I mean, I get your point there. Interesting. It'll be the real proof in the pudding. There will be with Bad Batch. When we see, if we see more of him in Bad Batch, like we see in Rebels, we see that transition really strongly. I mean, he's already kind of there. Um, in Bad Batch, it's a lot earlier. Uh, how he experiences the early Empire, and is that gonna owe more to uh the Rogue One and or Forrest Whitaker, or even though he kind of looks and sounds a little bit more like the Clone Wars era saw. Yeah, to your point, it's probably going to owe a lot to the Forrest Whitaker and Rogue One, because that's who we know the character to be now. So that's a good point.
But what's interesting about this and with Star Wars is sort of it seems like certain characters do have sort of their authors who they belong to. Especially on the TV side a little bit. Books, I mean, books to everybody. Oh dear, might be having some tech issues, or sneezing. But some authors have their pet characters. Charles Soule tends to like to reference himself, and nothing wrong with that. Every author used to do that. Tim Zahn back in the day was always referencing stuff. I mean, he had Thrawn as his pet character, back in Legends. But also it's interesting that it does seem like certain characters belong, and I hate it belong to certain authors.
Yeah.
And whether or not you think that's right or not, because it's interesting because like on the flip side, we had the sequel trilogy, and everyone was like, "Oh, they needed one director." I'm more malleable to that myself about that. That was necessarily the problem.
Yeah.
But they definitely didn't have, Luke, with the original trilogy, even when you swapped out, George for Kirshner and Kasdan, George was still very much executive producer, overseeing both of them. He let them do their thing, but he was very much, this is where I want the story to go. I came up with Vader as Luke's father. This is where we're going in this direction, and the Emperor. So he's overseeing that, and obviously with the prequels, he, wrote and directed and wrote, and so he very much oversaw those character trajectory. But with the sequels, JJ created the mold, and then Ryan added a lot more stuff to them. Especially with Poe's character, I think Poe Dameron, the character, is born in Last Jedi before Force Awakens. Kylo's a bit kind of more just an evolution of what came before. So it's sort of like, well, I'm glad that they didn't let just one creative do it, because I don't think we get Ryan Johnson's take on the characters.
Right.
But do you want so it's like, do you want the consistency of a JJ trilogy, or are you okay with I mean, I personally think it was a fine evolution from TFA Last Jedi myself. I see the natural evolution. That's just me. I know some people don't. But do you want that sort of shepherding of Abrams being more directly involved? Or, kind of like, well, Ryan kind of took what JJ was going to do and, put to the next level. I'm skeptical about Colin Trevorrow's take, but I've always been myself. But we don't know, so I'm not going to make a judgment call on that for sure. And then there's sort of that situation compared to, say, again, The Mandalorian, where they're not letting other authors or comic book people do stuff with him, and it's just Favreau and Filoni kind of sharing that trajectory with that character right now.
Yeah, I just want to jump in with the sequel trilogy and Ryan specifically. I mean, my worry with J.J. Abrams, and Joel, maybe you disagree with me or not, I don't know. I think he would have done a little bit of the goofy comic book thing of, this is this character, this is who they are. We're not going to do the work of thinking what happens when we throw them into this situation too much. And the only reason I think that is because that's entirely what Ryan Johnson did. He entirely said, he asked the question that George asked with Luke in Empire Strikes Back. What is the worst thing that could possibly happen, and how was Rey going to respond? And the worst thing that possibly happened is her learning that her parents aren't coming back, that her parents actually don't matter who her blood lineage is. It's about leaving Jakku and finding family. And so we talk about custodianship. I maintain everything we know. Well, not everything, but the deepest aspects of Rey's character that we know and love, that comes from the Last Jedi. All the everything to do with the cave and exploring her inner self, and that question of lineage and identity and found family, and even in life and then death that leads to new life, and that whole dialogue there. uh I mean, you talk about custodianship. Ryan took that character as far as he could take her, and did so in such a perfectly faithful, sustainable, suitable way that when she comes back to being all the Jedi in the Rise of Skywalker, you have seen her go through this gut wrenching experience, the Ringer, similar to with Luke. You say, "I'm a Jedi, like my father before me," in part in a different way, because he does go through that cave with his
Mhm.
lightsaber and whacks the mask off, and no recognizing that failure. Of course, Luke's Yoda to Luke, the greatest teacher failure is. So,
Oh yeah.
and we can talk also, about characters that generally did get better and more interesting. Um, Again, I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves, but yeah,
Oh,
especially with Ray. I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, and not to take away with everything with Ray and the Force Awakens. This young woman who is marooned on this desert planet, has to figure it out for herself. That is compelling. But then we really go the step further in the Last Jedi.
but then I think that begs the question of what of the characters who have always had sort of the authorial custodian, like Ahsoka, who's always been Filoni's
Hmm.
pet character in a lot of ways. She's never outside of the E.K. Johnson book. Really,
Yeah.
she's never really been allowed to kind of go outside of his purview.
Hmm.
Tim Zahn with Thrawn was like that in Legends.
Yeah.
Only kind of when Filoni got to really get his hands on it, and because he's Filoni, I think even Filoni outranks Zahn. Did I feel like Thrawn kind of came back into a meaningful way with me.
Hmm.
Um, for all we know, it's like I'm sure. I mean, obviously, you want John Favreau to tell his full story with the Mandalorian because he's not done yet.
Sure.
But it's like once Mando is done, it's like should Favreau be the only one to write this character? Like, what if someone had a new take on him and they want
Yeah.
to move him forward? If he's alive, who knows? I
Yeah.
don't know if Mandalorian's going to end, or even I don't. Well,
Yeah.
Kira is kind of an oddball character. He doesn't. But it's
Yeah.
like I guess the question is what's the better model? Should it be because obviously we do have the George
Hmm.
Lucas did bring the consistency for at least the original trilogy. But then again, you can argue the original trilogy is one story, and then Saga is one story.
Wonder story. Yeah.
I'm making up words, so it's
Yeah.
like, should it be like, okay, Favreau, you have your 4 seasons of Mando, you told your
Hmm.
story. Now I'm gonna, if the character's alive, I'm gonna pass the baton to someone else who wants to crack at this character.
Hmm.
Kind of like how comic books are, where it's like the comic book author comes, they tell their story with Batman, then they're
Yeah.
done. They pass it on to someone else. Like, oh, I have this new take on Batman. I'm gonna do
Mhm.
this now. But I guess what's your kind of thoughts on
Well,
this?
I think that proves, kind of demonstrates my point. Filoni has taken Ahsoka through the ringer. Uh,
Mhm,
you know that whole end of season 5, um, and just how, just I mean, and it, yeah, just how being betrayed by her family.
mhm,
Even Anakin does his best, but he can't ultimately, save her. He tries, and then they give her the pat answer of, "Oh, this was your trial." you know, um, from the beginning, from the beginning, 5 years in,
yeah,
he's put her through that experience and just how definitive it is, and then did it again with the confrontation with Vader, and then hopefully going to do it again with the quest for Ezra and Thrawn. Um, so I trust Filoni with Ahsoka frankly, more than I trust Ray with JJ Abrams with Ray.
I mean, I guess the question is
You know
though,
what I mean?
when's it time for Filoni to just to let go, move on, let
Yeah,
Ahsoka go to the next author, maybe a female author.
yeah,
That
maybe. I mean, I don't know if there needs to be a time necessarily. I mean, I get. Well, the question is when she becomes just Ahsoka. That's who she is and how she is, and when there is no other angle that he when he has trouble thinking outside the box with it,
Mhm.
with her. That's what I mean. So
I get, but here's like go back to Last
yeah.
Jedi. Last Jedi Luke can only really come from Ryan Johnson. I feel like. I mean, I know there's some, Luke was really a little depressed and
Hmm.
from George Lucas's version of memory, if that's. But I feel like Ryan was able to use Luke Skywalker in a way I think only he could do because
Hmm.
when you have someone with different creatives, you get a different outcome.
Yeah,
Clearly.
that's kind of
So
what you're getting at, and the
in
possibility. Yeah.
in the same way, like Ryan Johnson gave us the best version of Ray,
Mhm.
for all we know, the best version of Ahsoka could still come if from someone
Yeah,
else. We just don't know. We just no one's been given that chance yet.
it's possible. I just think that's a hypothetical that, to my mind, it's if it needs to happen, and hopefully Filoni has the humility to let it happen. Um,
One can
I
hope.
don't. Yeah.
I mean, I think the best version of Kira came from Charles Soule. And,
Yeah, I mean, well, that's another thing is, uh, Charles Soule. He's another creative who can do. I mean, shoot, some of the best Vader Anakin stuff is from Charles Soule. Like some of the best Lando stories from Charles Soule. So, I mean, he's another creative who knows how to really think through and plan out uh, story beats and character transformations. This is what I'm getting at. It is, yes, there is something to giving someone throwing a different angle at something. But what's really most important is custodianship. And this was getting at the beginning of the conversation. Is it really is taking a character through this transformation in a way that you look back and see, oh, that makes sense, and that this is how this person got from point A to point B, like Tony Leroy is doing with Andor. I mean, if they're, I mean, I think, yeah, you have in the notes. Sorry to steal your notes, but
oh
um,
no,
Tony Gilroy is the shepherd for Andor right now,
oh, very
and
much.
he's definitely going to take him. And I wonder if Marva's death is actually a big moment in that and a big point of that. But everyone he's encountered along the way, the Manifesto kid, Vel,
Gimmick.
Luthen, all these folks, his and especially being in the prison, and Andy Serkis character, and here I go again liking on character names, but they're weird Star Wars names. I don't know. You know, Andy is not a weird Star Wars name. All these experiences that are transformative, and that is, I mean, I'm also of the opinion. I also wonder if the best plot is character development, and plot is fundamentally character development, um, and the events that cause it. But I mean that's why, for example, I prefer the young adult High Republic novels. I enjoyed the adult High Republic novels in Phase One, but the young adult novels are clearly character driven stories that are more relatable and understandable to us. So
It. Oh yeah. Yeah. Like I don't know. Like I don't like taking away people's opportunities. Like I would
yeah,
like a woman writer to write Ahsoka because it's always just been the same white dude, and there's
I mean, there
definitely arguments for
was.
that.
That's the thing
I mean,
is,
I mean,
and
it
that's
gets
the
on.
thing. People, there was a queer woman wrote an Ahsoka novel.
I know. I mean, I didn't. I mean, I have my qualm with the book, but I'm like, I
Yeah,
know a lot of people who love it, and that's one of the
and
big
she
reasons
brought
why.
in a whole bunch of different things. Maybe here's the thing: I said if that book had come out, had been talked about a year later or 2 years later, it wouldn't have been made. Maybe in 10 years, maybe you're. I mean, I totally see what you're saying. I totally get what you're saying. Right? Let someone else have a say in what these characters do and where they go. Um, it's just that, I mean, maybe it's at the end of this live action series. And then he'll give up the reins. It's just a question of, when in the timeline does this story go? Uh, is there more room? Do we want another uh,
Right.
during the Dark Times story? And is that Ahsoka? Is that the story? I mean, is there a Sabe Ahsoka story that E.K. Johnson gets to write?
That'd
I'm
be
just throwing
something.
that out there. I don't know.
I read that.
Yeah.
Um,
Um.
but this
Sorry.
does.
Good.
I was gonna say, but this does. I guess we can move on to the kind of the second big part of this. This does get into kind of another another big thing that kind of is one of the double-edged swords of having multiple creatives
Mhm,
working in the same universe, and that is authorial intent.
mhm.
Let me see where to put the notes. Anyway,
Yeah,
so this is one
it's
of those
another
weird.
concept for you to define. Please go ahead.
So, literary intent is like what is the thematic meaning of the author? What is the context? Like, like Star Wars is an anti-fascist story. Sticks
Mhm,
with that. There's that version, but then there's also just little things that. So, like, you know, George Lucas said Anakin is the chosen one. That is the definitive. He wrote it. He had no and when he owned it, he had no desire to change it. So Anakin is the chosen one. Bada bing, bada boom, bada bum. Final say, because I
but
own
what
it.
does that mean? He never goes
But
into
then she
that.
sells it, and it's like, what's stopping J.J. Abrams from saying no? Ray's the chosen one. We're
Right.
good. Like there was nothing to stopping Luke Skywalker and the Force Ghost going, Ray, you were the chosen one the whole time. No, he didn't do that, thankfully, and kind of
Yeah.
saves people headaches. But you know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
nothing stops that, and there's also like a bunch of lore and thing. Because again,
Mhm.
George didn't Tolkien this thing with like deep notes and paper. Like
Mhm.
he kind of just left it open to his own intentions, and
Yeah.
people kind of switch it up and stuff like that. He's gone on interviews saying, "Oh, well, the emperor's not supposed to ever appear again in public, unless an author says, you can appear in public because I say so." Um,
Yeah.
so that's sort of the malleability of the lore and the
Mhm.
malleability of the universe, where like the intent of what kind of George was going for might change, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse, and sometimes just
Yeah.
because it changes. Because a lot of the lore and stuff in Star Wars very much kind of has changed as people add to it.
Yeah.
Um, that's just kind of the nature of the beast.
Yeah. So I guess two things, if I can jump in there,
Yeah.
that gets to it is, I mean, this does relate to what you're talking about with EU fans being open to malleability or flexibility or and change and whatnot. Yeah, and kind of they there was no, at no point did George Lucas say uh to Tim Zahn or to whoever, Michael Stackpole, we're gonna create an integrated canon now, and it's gonna be all guarded and guided by this story group. James Lucino's mentioned, talked about how there was a form of that a little bit, but it wasn't the same as when, in 2015, with the Disney changeover, there was that. We've gone back and forth again over the last 10 months about how successful the a consistent canon between paper and screen has been. I will say, I mean, the thing is, between paper to paper and screen to screen, there is hopefully more consistency. One of the examples here, though, and maybe this gets back to, um, yeah, I mean, I don't know what Kieran Gillen had for Dr. Afra, and I don't know what he had in mind for her. So this gets back to when a new author takes over another character, takes over a character from someone else, and yeah, I mean, again, to your point, it can get better. Character can get better, and Afra is a great example of this. Um, it what is interesting is, we have Kieran Gillen's Vader run. You have Sarah Kuhn's audiobook, and this actually does fit out of universe, because the discrepancies between the comic and the audiobook are because Afra is telling this story and she's telling it from her point of view. Along comes Alyssa Wong, who uh, is themselves a queer person, and in a different way than Afra is, sure, but also an Asian American woman, or a person, sorry, and and is able to grasp, and Afra's mixed, and I think maybe Alyssa Wong is mixed too. I'm not quite sure, but ethnicity. Anyways, Afra has really come home to herself in Alyssa Wong's run. Kieran Gillen had his own run of hers, but then we have the most significant story with Afra, in part now involving everyone from her past, from Senna Staros and Magna Tolan and all that. But here's the question: is Alyssa Wong the custodian of Afra now? Um, and it's in part because of what within Charles Soule's whole
Mhm.
kind of oversight over this Crimson saga,
Hmm.
uh, Afra's been able to go on this journey with the Spark and the Ascendant, and
Mhm.
it's been I mean, here's the thing: we talked about this, it's been the most transformative, and I think it's going to end up becoming the most transformative chapter in her story, encountering this ancient technology that's trapped her inside her own head. Um, has Wong actually grabbed the mantle? And if anyone else, including if Afra gets on screen, whenever that might happen, I think they at least have to consult Alyssa Wong. You just have to get them involved somehow. It kind of makes me wonder, to what extent is Charles Soule involved in any kind of High Republic era storytelling on screen as well. So that kind of gets there. Kind of getting at that. The other side of it is to say, yeah, so it's tricky, is what you're getting with the authorial intent. Getting back to this point, um, it's tricky because you intend one thing and then an author goes in a whole other direction, and like all the instances you mentioned, the wider scope of the chosen one. Um, I'm trying to think of maybe smaller
I don't
examples of that.
actually think any of that's been really contradicted. I'm just
Sure.
giving the most extreme example of like, no, this
Yeah.
directly changes the chosen one's
I
fate.
mean, I mean, you talk about Luke going from Chuck the lightsaber to this weapon is deserves more respect. I mean, that's authorial intent gone, not awry, but
I don't know.
between Ryan and JJ.
I kind of that's actually one of the few things I think Abrams was actually building off Ryan was like, no, Luke's kind of now he's mentally back in his right mind. So it's like now
Okay,
I've always seen it like him being cheeky about it. It's like,
I guess I
hey,
could
I
see
used to
that,
be
but
like this too, Ray, just a couple days ago. Remember a
yeah,
year ago? Like, don't be playing these games with me, honey.
okay, but
Um,
even if it works, I'll say I think Ryan still intended him to be the anti saber character, including the way the Last Jedi ends, right, with him just projecting in a very pacifist way and not actually crossing blades with Kylo. Anyways, all this to say that getting back to this is again why I love the High Republic so much, is because it just sidesteps this whole problem and says what they literally sit down at a table, the luminous authors say, what do we intend to happen here? And um and it's this great planning out and plotting out, and this great example of collective custodianship, and how, yeah, and then we even have these new authors in phase two. They've come in, they went back 150 years, so it's still doesn't worry about the problem. It's also a smaller story, and they've all bought it and committed to it. So I said this a lot of times, but it appeals to my sense of wanting a character, wanting an author, a set of authors to make good on what they've set out to do. And maybe that's kind of what frustrates me, when that intent kind of goes in a different direction, even if it works.
uh,
I mean, I
oh,
guess I'll say this. So the last thing I'll say though is there are clear guides, there are clear shepherds for specific characters. You have Vern with Justina Ireland. You have Markian, that guy. Whereas was the screw that guy with Charles Soule. Kiev, who Kevin Scott introduced in Jedi Fall in Dooku Jedi Lost with Kevin Scott. Even phase two and phase one Porter Engle with Charles Soule. And again, it makes bringing in these authors for phase two, because new characters for in a shorter time. So, I mean, that's part of it. Is the lesson is only have more limited intent, and maybe that's kind of what I was getting at before talking about the Ahsoka novel, and how only having limited intent, anyone else having a more limited intent for Ahsoka, for Ezra, for Thrawn, uh, because they want to see what gets popular and where things go.
oh. So
So,
with the High Republic,
mhm,
I agree and disagree in the fact that the High Republic was always a single initiative. The idea is a big story told
mhm.
through a bunch of other stories, a bunch of the different stories,
It's a different
and
kettle of fish. That's true.
yeah, and you get these authors and like, okay, what is the big story, and then how do the little stories fit in with the big stories.
Mhm.
And that's obviously this whole battle against denial.
Yeah.
With the sequel trilogy, I don't necessarily agree. Like, it was going to be planned out, and plans change.
Mhm.
But the trilogy, still a story told over 3 parts. Whether or not you have
Yeah.
that a year, or you do the original trilogy thing of like some time in between,
Mhm.
it's still a singular story built over 3 parts. And whether or not it's the same director or not, I do think with with the original trilogy, you had Lucas at least building off himself. Well, that still led to weird retcons, like Luke and Leia being
Yeah,
like
it's
brother and
true. You
sister.
did.
So, not gonna say it's a perfect situation,
Mhm.
but it's like with the prequels, at least it's sort of like, again, he kind of knew there was still less confusing stuff in there, but he knew it's like, okay, well, Vader got to become Anakin at the end, so
Mhm.
but kind of the details probably a lot malleable, but we know where the end point is. But then in the wider context of the universe, Andor, Tony Gilroy, he's just writing Andor. It's a prequel
Mhm.
to Rogue One, but that's as far as his intent goes. He's not setting up stuff for
Mhm.
other things down the road. Cat.
Which I think is why it's succeeding,
Oh
frankly.
yeah, so he's
Yeah.
focusing very internally. Mando's trying to be a little more marvelly, we're setting up potential spin-offs.
Mhm.
Although it does seem like Favreau's going to oversee that, so he's kind of being the mini Feige of that era for
Yeah.
sure. With Book of Boba Fett, obviously setting up doing Mando season 3,
Mhm.
which probably should have been Mando season 3, but oh well. And obviously Ahsoka show
Mhm.
is part of that mini universe. Skeleton Crew seems like it's the most detached from everything right now because it's not John and Dave just writing another show. It's that he's overseeing it.
Mhm.
Um,
And then the
but
Acolyte is
right, and then
something
the
else
Acolyte,
entirely.
which is technically set in the High Republic, but it's not. But it's sort of like nothing is stopping anything moving forward to build.
Mhm.
I don't know if we'll get complete payoff to every storyline. Maybe we won't know what happens to Mon Mothma's daughter at the end. Maybe we'll get a hint, and then it's sort of like they'll get word. But what
Right.
if someone down the line wants to do the Mon Mothma's daughter spin-off show set
Mhm.
during the dark times, and it's not Tony Gilroy, someone else? Obviously, the smart thing is to build off the intent and then get your own direction. But Tony Gilroy's not setting up that show. Or what if someone wants to do a Bix show if Bix lives, obviously. Like The Adventures of Bix.
Right.
Um, maybe from someone of Tony Gilroy's team, which I think would be cool. Because obviously remember, Tony Gilroy's not writing this alone. He got a team.
True.
So if they're doing their kind of spin-offs of Andor, but that weren't planned. It's just like, hey, I kind of like this character. Maybe we can do this, and Catherine's gonna be like, yeah, that's a cool idea.
Which
But
is kind of
they're
how it works, right? I mean, often.
yeah,
I mean, that's
so
how Endor happened, right?
but I can't, but I
Yeah.
don't think, and I think this is what fans want.
Mhm.
And I don't think it's physically possible because I
Mhm.
think it's too big. We can't have the grand council of authors and Pablo and Kathleen and directors all say,
Mhm.
this is how every book, comic, movie will connect.
Right.
We're not making I know we talk about a grand story in Star
Mhm.
Wars, and we like to think of it as such, and in some ways it is, but it's not. The High Republic is its own bubble. It has its council. It has they build off each other because it's in the same universe, and it's
Yeah.
well, Andor's doing that. Maybe we'll be inspired, or obviously we gotta do some stuff to get to the First Order because we know what Force Awakens is at the end of the day, so that's going to affect.
Mhm.
But it's not. This isn't technically all one story. It is, and it
Mhm.
isn't at the same time.
Yeah.
And I
Oh.
think it's almost unmanageable to perfectly coordinate everything so that
Mhm.
everything is just a setup for the next thing. And it's like Marvel movies the Marvel Cinematic Universe on steroids.
Right. And I mean, two things to say there. The MCU is still smaller than that, right?
Mhm.
It's only what 20 something films now.
Even they couldn't
Over.
get it right because their
You-
TV stuff didn't always connect
Yeah.
well.
Is that? No, I mean the story group never set out to do that. It was never
Right.
the intent. Uh, it's never the intent um of Kathleen Kennedy in her office to enforce that. I will say though, is we do conceive of it as a continuous thing, even though it doesn't happen intentionally. So
No,
it's a
yeah.
continuous story that happens accidentally, right?
Mhm.
And the when it doesn't happen accidentally, it's because Charles Soule is writing in the Rebel Alliance, but he's referring to something that happened with the Luke and Lando find an IL ship. This is in the Star Wars ongoing comic. He's referring to his own thing that he's done in the past, which is another thing about custodianship that happens all the time, right? Especially in Star Wars, especially by Charles Soule. He has a way of weaving all his stuff together, with
Oh,
moment
yeah,
and
very
whatnot.
nice.
But and it works perfectly. I'll say that.
Mhm.
But
Oh, yeah.
yeah, I mean, I do get what you're saying. Is on the whole, on the grand scheme of things, no, it isn't possible. It isn't manageable. It isn't desirable. That would not be a good
Oh,
story. That would not
yeah.
be, like we're saying with Ahsoka. It'd be good to have other voices in there, maybe. Um, Imagine with everything, it would not be a good story. I mean, creatives need to go off by themselves and write. You know
Or
what I
even
mean?
just trying the High Republic thing on a grand scale. It's like,
Yeah.
I I I I'm glad Andor and Mandalorian are going on. I don't need
Mm.
those 2 to, like, be talking to each other like, "We're doing this, so you need to start setting up for that."
No,
Like, no, let Andor just tell its own story.
no,
It's not
that's
part
fine.
of the Mandoverse. It's not part of the
No,
High Republic.
it's fun when, say, Bad Batch sets up cloning stuff. That is interesting, but that can't be the. I mean, here's the thing. You talked about Mon Mothma and her daughter and whatnot. Tony Gilroy is not telling Mon Mothma's daughter's story. I'm blanking
Right.
on her name. Also,
Lita.
pardon?
Lita, I think her name
Clea,
is.
yeah, Leah, whatever. Uh, Tony Gilroy in this context is telling Mon Mothma's story, right? And so everything to do with all of her, with Leah and even Vel to some extent, and certainly with Perrin, that has to do with Mon Mothma's story and what it means for her. And so he's shepherding her to possibly again to the point of that meeting, but at least into whatever decision she makes about her loan and the finances and the moral compromises that she's facing in this moment. That's the focus. And so yeah, I mean it's another character transforming story
Mhm.
that you gotta be fixated on. You gotta focus on these things. You gotta drill down. I mean, that's the thing with what Ryan Johnson did with Luke and with Ray. He drilled down what's gonna happen, what makes the most sense. I
Uh,
do think it's with what Filoni's done with Ahsoka, what Charles Soule's done with everybody.
mhm.
Last thing I'll say though is it's not desirable to have this massive thing. Again, maybe what you're helping me see is the reason High Republic is I find it so successful in part is because it's smaller, because it's not claiming to. I mean, it's telling a significant chapter in the history of the Republic. I will say that, um,
Oh, yeah.
but it's not. It's in terms of time. It's not saying everything has to connect to not saying High Republic has to connect to them. I mean, that's the whole paper screen divide has to connect to the Mandoverse or whatever. Um, it's not saying that uh, High Republic has to connect and set up to uh,
Comics.
yeah
Easy
to
Ray.
anything in the comics or to the novel about the Inquisitor coming up, or Jedi Survivor or any of that. It can. It's fun if it does, but it doesn't have to. Yeah, that's the good point. That is
The
a good
High
point.
the
But
High
but that's
Republic.
the thing is phase two intentionally is setting up phase three and phase one and phase three. Intentionally. That's the intent. And
Mhm.
they're making good on that promise. And it's
Here's a
succeeding.
great example. The
Yeah.
High Republic is not backstory to Hidden Empire. I mean, if Charles Soule's putting a connection to the High
He just
Republic,
might, but
he
no,
just
yeah.
he does that because he wants to. He's like, oh, here's a cool little
Yeah.
High Republic connection from 1,000 years in the past, but it's not
Totally.
backstory to the High Republic.
Yeah.
It's Hidden Empire and High Republic are two separate events happening. They're connected. The only thing that connects them really is same author.
Mhm.
Same with like Andor. Like Andor's not backstory to Mandoverse. Like
Right.
um now, to be fair,
Mhm.
it would have been probably maybe smoother if they had done a High Republic Council thing with JJ Ryan and Colin back in the day, kind of have them all sit down and maybe like just plan it out and kind of
Mhm.
like, okay, JJ, you do this, Ryan, we do that, and Colin, you do that. Maybe, possibly, I don't know. I've heard perhaps rumors that maybe the next era of films moving forward in the timeline might have a little bit more
Mhm.
coordination with each other if they kind of want to kind of like try the High Republic
Yeah.
thing in movie form a little bit with like
To that point, I do think Favreau, Filoni, whoever's being involved in the Ahsoka show, whoever's being involved, I mean, who was going to be involved in the Rangers of the New Republic show, I think they did have that kind of coordination going on.
I mean, Filoni's writing the Ahsoka show, so that's his baby
Yeah.
project.
At
And it
least
seems
Favreau
like
and Filoni are coordinating. There we go. They have a
yeah.
council of two.
Might be
Yeah.
Council 3 because it sounds like the Spider-Man dude and one of his
Oh
writers
yeah.
for Skeleton Crew is
Yeah.
also part of the Mandoverse, and
Yeah.
Favreau's overseeing that.
Mhm.
And, it's all about kind of, and with that, you kind of have to, much like with High Republic, kind of find a way to balance having your own voice and being in your own part of the sandbox, but
Mhm.
also if you want to be part of the
Yeah.
higher story, you should. And that's sort of like, like Skeleton Crew should
Mhm.
be part of the Mandoverse, and that's the same era and might meet some of the same characters, but
Yeah.
still be its own separate thing.
Mhm.
Kind of like the MCU, where it's like, you watch Doctor Strange, you watch Spider Man. I don't have to watch Doctor Strange to watch Spider Man. Like it's mentioned, but Doctor Strange is still building off of Doctor Strange 1. Um,
Sure.
yeah. Let me check my notes just to make sure if we've got all through the authorial custodianship stuff because it's
Yeah.
I guess you asked what does it mean for the future plan? Oh,
Yeah, we
another
kind of covered that a little bit.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah, as in
I
intent meaning future plans. Because authorial intent, like you mentioned, it could also mean the author's intended interpretation, like the literary theory thing. But yeah,
I
no,
guess
I think
I like what I actually put there. I like my
mhm,
own notes.
good job.
But it will be interesting to see because one thing I think I've noticed, people always say, "Oh, they're betraying George Lucas." Actually, no. I mean, a lot of the people at Lucas don't work with George, and when it comes to the big things, they've
Mhm,
kept his intent pretty clear. Like,
yeah.
this is what balance of the Force means. No, big no on the Yoda species reveal, that sort of thing.
Mhm,
In terms of future plans, I always kind of both scary in a scary way, but but in the way that the future is always scary because we don't know always in motion the future is, and as Jedi, we must not fear these things.
mhm,
Will they move away from these intents that Lucas has always talked about as this next generation, those generations separate from Lucas, start to dominate
mhm,
Lucasfilm? Kathleen Kennedy was picked by Lucas. A lot of the people have worked
true.
with George. They've been there for decades
Yeah.
with George, and they're like, well, they're not going to be around forever. New generations are going to come in, and someone's one day is going to be like, one day going to get the approval of, I'm going to do the Yoda species. I have an idea what Yoda species is. I'm going to reveal it. Dang it. Or the world between worlds is time travel, and we're going to time travel and change the past. And, something I don't think Filoni ever intended with World Between Worlds. And that's kind of scary
No.
because I think that can easily be used that way in the wrong hands.
Mhm,
So that's just kind of the last kind of I don't want to end
yeah.
like in a downer mode, but it's something I do think about in terms of like, well, the Lucas, we will one day get through a generation that's more and more further away from Lucas because he's not getting any younger and they're not getting any younger. And
True.
obviously,
And
probably I'm
yeah.
not worried like in the near term, but like
Mhm.
50 years when we're all old and have our grandkids.
Yeah, and worldviews change and things like that. I mean, we're probably gonna get someone trying to write a Grey Jedi story, and we're probably gonna get someone who thinks,
Colin
well,
tried.
yeah, when we have characters in Star Wars who think balance of the Force means light and dark. Um, we
Colin
have
drove.
that. Yeah, yeah. So I mean, maybe I'm glad that's certain, or hopefully Kathleen Kennedy or somebody would have axed that a little bit of it. Um, I talked to at the beginning about with Kira and the game mechanics, and that's terrible, terrible thing to talk. metaphor. I don't mean that. I mean
Level up
there's
your
a
force powers.
there's a core mythology
Mhm,
to what Star Wars is, and I think with George Lucas, he had two rules that are constantly pushing against each other. Things that again, I think High Republic did wonderfully. I think Last Jedi did wonderfully. Um, it's stay true to the core mythology that light will triumph over darkness. The
mhm,
darkness actually doesn't actually deserve to exist on its own, but
mhm.
light must confront it.
Right.
Um, that love and self-giving will
Mhm.
triumph over selfishness and fear. Uh,
Right.
that's the core mythology. That is what
Yeah.
the Force does, moves towards that. Life will triumph over death, even through death. That's the core theology of Star Wars. Can I bring that back up here? That's the core theology of Star Wars. Just saying. Um,
Mhm,
that Ryan Johnson put in there word for word.
mhm.
Life leads to death and decay. That leads to new life. I mean that's in there. Um, but at the same time, his second rule was take as much creative swings as you want with that mythology. Take it, carry it as far as you can go. And I go back to that whiteboard that the Luminous authors had. What is Star Wars? What is the core mythology? What is it about? Some fun things like dinosaurs, are in there. Not pro war. Star Wars, not pro war.
Exactly.
Really asking, okay, what is this really about? And then there's running with it and saying, what's
Yeah.
this new, different, weird thing we can do with it? Um, and then again, JJ, I think really did that. Talk about what is a hero? What is George Lucas saying about what a hero is? What did we all think George Lucas was saying about a hero? And I'm going to put him in Luke's mouth. What do you think? I'm going to go stand up in front of the First Order with a laser sword? No, he didn't. Because if you read the actual text of Star Wars, meaning the films, Return of the Jedi, Chuck, I'm a Jedi like my father before me, um, telling it in a new way, and with it in a new generation, with a young woman, and a black man and a Hispanic man, letting people see themselves in this story and touch this core mythology, um, in ways that are relevant to them, while also being and not while, because it's not actually in opposition, and that is still being true to the core mythology.
No,
That the Force is for everyone, and so
yeah, I agree. And I say what you will, but that's one of the reasons why I always prefer Rise of Skywalker over Trevorrow's cut because the Great Jedi
sure.
thing. And Rise of Skywalker's not the deepest movie in the world, but I still think it gets light versus darkness when at the end of the
It
day you
does.
got Palpatine exploding and it's like all the Sith evil just dying off.
I
It's
mean,
my
his own darkness comes back onto him. It gets curved on.
exactly.
There's more Augustin. Sorry, Augustin time.
No, no.
His evil gets curved back onto himself, and he ends up being the agent of his own destruction. Yeah,
Oh
it
no.
does hit the core mythology. It's true.
And I've talked about before, Palpatine in that movie just visually is everything the dark side represents. It's like
Yeah,
a decaying clone body with the spirit of someone who should be dead is
this is a
not
different era,
natural.
but
Is
kind of
not natural. This is everything the light side and just the force and like death you
yeah.
just you die and that's it. You move on. But no, Palpatine's through dark science and
Mhm.
veins is trying to
Yeah.
hang on to dear life.
Well,
That's
he's he
unnatural.
refuses to respect death as a source
Exactly.
of life. He sees death as the source of power, and and as the means to an end, and not a source of life.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah.
Um
Anyway, that's a whole tangent.
I
We've gone on
I
fairly. So good.
I want to go back one more time
Mhm.
just to responsibility. Because I do think Force Awakens in a weird way is um kind of example people will throw out rightfully or wrongly. I think wrongly because obviously without things in Force Awakens we don't get Last Jedi. Of
Yeah.
the responsibility of treating a character. In episode 7, Han and Leia are divorced. Luke ran away, and then in episode 8, we find out he just gave up. So
Mhm.
again, I actually think TFA Han is the best version of that character, by none. So there's one example right there. Um, but that's sort of like, hey Abram, why did you get to, ruin Han and Leia's happy life, and why don't they have Jedi grandbabies? Why isn't Luke the great grandmaster of the Jedi, as we all thought he was going to be? Now, some of that just is not just responsibility. That's just people have their imaginations and maybe their biases with the old EU and stuff like that. But it's sort of like, what gave you the right to do that to these characters, Mr. Abrams, and obviously to Ryan Johnson? It's like, what gave you the right to kill off Luke?
Or even just stick him on as a grumpy old hermit in the first place.
Exactly. So that's kind of to me the biggest kind of argument of like the responsibility, like what gives Charles Soule the right to kill off Kira? If Kira gets killed, I don't know. She might live. I hope she does, but it doesn't sound not looking good for Kira.
Again, here's the answer to your question. J.J. Abrams and Ryan Johnson and Charles Soule are, J.J. Abrams and Ryan Johnson specifically have put these characters through a transformative experience, right? It's off screen. It's a couple years in the past. We see it in the flashback in Last Jedi. And Last Jedi does a clearer job of showing it to us, of the fall of Ben Solo. But that can have an effect, and credit to Beth Revis for telling us, even at their marriage, the seeds of why things might diverge. So,
right. So I think that's good. Let me just check the notes. I think we've covered it. I think I did. Have we defined authorial custodianship?
I think so. It's interesting. We went into narrative custodianship. Just overall story, but again, maybe that gets to my point that plot is character development, at least at its best.
I gotta go back and forth because, like, what is plot, but just character goes to the grocery store. They have an epic character development throughout. I mean, it's true though.
Character falls on their face.
It's true, man. It's like, I know it sounds silly, but like, if you have a great character, the most mundane thing can become interesting.
True.
But yeah, I think that will do it for this week, and hopefully next week maybe we'll talk about Andor, because the finale is
that's
true.
Yeah, but for now, thanks everyone for joining us. If you liked what you saw, if you liked what you heard, wanna write a novel, wanna write an essay, 13 pages double spaced on my desk. No, I'm just kidding. If you have some thoughts, feel free to put them in the comments below, or again, I'll mention the plugs again in a minute, but let us know on social media, Twitter or Instagram at Ion Canon Pod. Please do give this video a like and a share. Subscribe to the Star Wars Underworld YouTube channel if you have not done so already. Joel, where can they follow you, find you on the internet?
I'm going down with the ship. I'm still on Twitter. I'm staying strong. I'm gonna stay there until it all goes kaputski. Because I don't really actually have anywhere else to go. I don't know. My Hive doesn't work on my computer or my phone, so I'm not gonna try that. I do have a Mastodon, but I don't even know what it is, so don't bother.
Do they know what it is?
Now, is a question. Twitter, JID 2021 again, JID 2021, and I still use the @Ion Canon Pod Twitter as well. We're going down with the ship, folks. If that's what happens.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say I'm curious about Mastodon. I'm curious about Hive. I might just try it out just to see what's there. I don't know, but for now, I'm definitely gonna stick with Twitter, NEUG485, Instagram, MNEUG1138, and of course Instagram as well @Ion Canon Pod. Mainly post the pictures of the covers that I talk about on Tractor Beam. That's mainly what I use the Instagram for. I should do more promotion. Should get on that. But anyway, you can also, of course, follow us, again on Twitter and Instagram @Ion Canon Pod, Apple Podcasts, on Spotify. The audio version of this episode, it's getting late. I'm gonna do that tomorrow. Put it up on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. But yeah, we also, of course, got a shout out to the mothership, the Star Wars Underworld at the SWU. That's also Twitter and Instagram for now. Again, we're talking, we're thinking, we're brainstorming, we're trying to figure out what we're doing here. But for now, this is where we are at. So yeah, let us know, and of course also the Discord. Let us know if you want in on that. DM us. I don't know if the link in the description below is fresh, but if not, then yeah, let us know, and we will get you in the door to talk to us and chat with us. We're just normal dudes, just happen to talk on YouTube. But give your thoughts too. We would definitely welcome them. But yeah, for now, that's been probably our longest episode, just the two of us. It's a heady conversation. Next week, yeah, as Joel mentioned, we are going to rejoin the podcast and talk about and or the whole season, because we can actually see it as a whole season. I don't have to wait till spoilers. I'm actually taking the day off to go watch Canada play the World Cup for the first time in 36 years. So that's in the afternoon, so I can actually watch the episode in the morning. So that'll be good. Hopefully I can pay attention. It'll be good. Anyway, yeah. But until then, Joel, let's blow this thing. Head home.